late. And we'll start without a preamble. Obviously the topic is very interesting, as well as something that a lot of people have been thinking about a lot over the last few decades. There's a lot more women who have become educated and have started to have tremendous impact on various professions, as well as in general on the workplaces. Especially, I work on education. Almost the entire intake in primary increasingly is becoming female teachers, and it's having an impact both on public and private sector. But it's not just about schools and education, it's going way beyond, but with some very significant barriers that we still need to talk about, think about, and see how they are going to be addressed and removed. We are very fortunate to have three wonderful speakers here today. Ms. Nida Usman, who is the founder for Lahore Education and Research Network Learn Pakistan, works with lawyers, but is working on issues that pertain to women working in the workplace in general as well. Dr. Kate Vibroni. Kate is a postdoctoral fellow at Duke, and is also working as a visiting professor at LUMS, and is also doing projects at SERP. And then Ms. Fatma Khalid, who works with the Strategic Reforms Unit in Punjab with the Chief Minister Secretariat, part of the Chief Minister, and is leading the women-centric reforms introduced under SRU. She'll also tell you how you can get subsidized motorcycles. Might not be a bad idea. So without anything else, Nida, can we request you, and I'll request each of the speakers to talk about 15 minutes, so we have plenty of time at the end to ask them questions and make their life difficult.
Of my study, as well as my initiative called Women in Law. Basically, the initiative is for Pakistani lawyers, female lawyers, but I believe that a lot of the work that we did as part of that initiative, specifically pertaining to the challenges that female lawyers face in the profession, can be more or less equally applied to women workforce participation in general in Pakistan. So for us at Learn, it has always been more of an economic concern than just a gender imbalance, because we see in the women of Pakistan an untapped talent and untapped potential, and that's something that can no longer be ignored if Pakistan's national objective of sustained economic growth and development policy is to be achieved. So we need to focus on the 50% of population, and we need to sort of find out ways to integrate them into workforce. I'm here in my capacity as a lawyer at the moment, so I will be basically focusing more on the legislative loopholes that still persist and which make it difficult for women to actually participate in the workforce. But before we do that, I'd like to ask you all one thing, because we need to, before we actually understand the legislative loopholes, we need to understand what we mean by constraints on the women in the workforce. So I'd like to ask you, all the women here, what would you count as a constraint as far as women workforce participation is concerned? Just very quickly, if I can have one or two views on what you think, what would you classify as a constraint on women workforce participation? Unequal pay. Unequal pay, okay. What else? Lack of child care, yes. What else? Maternity leave, all of that, absolutely. So these are precisely the kind of constraints in the context of which I'll be discussing the laws and see where the legal position of Pakistan stands as far as these enabling scenarios are concerned. But as far as I'm concerned, I think that the most pervasive and the most underlying factor that works against women is the anachronistic mindset and the stereotypical approach that we have as far as gender roles are concerned in the society. And this anachronistic mindset, or the other word for it is the patriarchal mindset, manifests itself most profusely in the middle strata of the society, because that's where people still need to accept this whole concept whether women should work at all or not. It's because it's people in this strata of society that still they're not as driven by poverty or needs as the households in the rural and the informal sector. And on top of it, they haven't yet acquired the kind of progressive mindset. In fact, they actually consider the global trends as an attack on their culture and roots. So basically, that's an underlying problem. Obviously, it manifests itself in the upper strata and the lower strata as well, but in different ways. But it's the middle strata. It's the women falling in the middle strata that really have to fight to access this right at all, to be able to convince the families that they need to be, and why they need to work, and why they need to be in the workforce. So the solution for that is only education and awareness at a very grassroots level. And by education, I don't mean education in the formal sector only. I think we need to really get down to the roots. And I believe a lot of these new advertisements are coming that I keep seeing on the television that are reversing the gender roles. So that's a very good tacit way of actually, developing the mindset of the society. So we need to be able to give these people a chance to understand and take to concepts of equality and non-discrimination in the right context and in the right connotation, not as an attack on the culture, but as a necessary part of it for peace and progress. Because you cannot deny half of the population rights and expect that there'll be peace and prosperity and progress. So, that has to be balanced, and this kind of grassroots level awareness has to be initiated so that, we can basically deal with our fundamental problem of an anachronistic mindset. The other constraints, as you already mentioned, are equality before the law, whether it be in terms of equal pay, whether it be in terms of accessing the kind of professions that we can work in or that are open to us as women, as well as other factors that Kate is going to be touching upon, such as mobility, or which, at the government level, we need to see whether there's any enabling environment provided that, supports women as far as their workplace is concerned. And another very important factor, of course, is safety at the workplace. So women need to be, they need to find their workplaces safe. And so I'm going to be discussing all the laws that are relevant in these contexts. Now, if I talk about equality before the law, Pakistan is a legislative and a commitment-rich country. We do all the right things as far as, signing these treaties is concerned. So we are like signatories to all the important human rights documents, starting from the UDHR down to CEDAW and even several ILO conventions. For instance, CEDAW we signed on 12th April 1996. But till date, we don't have a standalone law that prohibits discrimination against women. What we do have instead is a chapter of fundamental rights in our constitution and some specific laws or some specific legislations that deal with some subjects that are related to women. So that's what we have. We still don't have a standalone law dedicated to prohibiting discrimination against women. And as far as the provisions in the constitution are concerned, so on paper, we have that equality. On paper, all citizens are supposed to be equal before the law, and there can be no discrimination on the basis of gender. This is Article 25 of the Constitution, by the way. We also have Section 15 of the West Pakistan Minimum Wage Rules of 1962, where Section 15 of that Act basically says that the principle of equal pay for work of equal value should be applied when you're fixing the minimum wage. But the problem with describing this concept as a principle is that it lacks any legal sanction. So that if women are not being paid equally, there is no sort of forum that they can go to enforce this as a right. Although I know that the federal government is working on this very issue and they're trying to come up with a draft model law for the provinces as well, where they are trying to enshrine equal pay for equal work of equal value, but that hasn't happened till now. But as far as on paper is concerned, women can enter any profession that they like or trade, save for some exceptional industries or vocations which are not suited to their gender. Some people might argue that this is also discrimination, but the fact of the matter is, or the on-ground reality is, that in the report that Pakistan submitted to CEDAW in 2005, it was conceded that this is actually in line with Article 11F of CEDAW, which basically allows the state to make special provisions for the health and safety as well as the reproductive function of the women. And also, this provision, which is in Article 37E of the Constitution, hasn't really been used against the women practically. So we see women in the army, we see women in the Air Force, we see them as traffic wardens. So as such, as such, this hasn't really been used against us, but yes, the language is anachronistic, and maybe it will be better if we can just move away from this language to avoid any confusions. But yes, I mean, we would all probably agree that some safeguards for the health and safety of women need to be ensured as well. So yeah, so that's there. So there is equality on paper. What we lack is equality in practice, and what we lack is equality in terms of the enabling environment where the discrimination mainly takes place. So I'm going to be taking you to those laws now. So for instance, Article 37E of the Constitution does guarantee the provision of maternity benefits to women, but the Punjab Maternity Benefit Ordinance basically, expounds on that article and does allow women 12 weeks of paid maternity leave, right? But it says that you need to be in employment for at least 4 months from the date of the delivery of your child. So I was just wondering, what if the child is delivered prematurely and the 4-month period is not met? So is that woman then denied her maternity rights? I don't know. I mean, because the law is quite silent and it's quite basic. In fact, if you look at the Indian Maternity Benefit Act of 2017, that really advances the rights of women as far as this area is concerned. So the 12-week maternity leave has been extended to 36 weeks. They also have maternity leave for adopting or commissioning mothers who adopt children below the age of 3 months. And they have the work from home option and flexible work options, as well as a crèche facility that should be provided at workplaces so that women can visit their children, during the day. At least 4 times they're allowed to do that. And paternity leaves, I mean, that's really funny because you don't have the concept of paternity leave enshrined in any of the labor laws that we have. And India may be a situation. So at best what you have are the leave rules for the civil servants, and in Pakistan will be, I think as recently as 2012, 7 days of maternity leave for fathers has been made available, and India के अंदर यही 7 days 15 days बन जाते हैं. So for the male, of course private sector does sort of ensure this through their own policies and through their own जो उनका employment contract होता है and all, so they have their own policies for the workers. So the situation is not as bad as it seems, but there's no law that incorporates the concept of paternity leave. And this is where our patriarchal mindset actually kicks in. So the issue of basically telling you about India and Pakistani maternity law is not to pitch Pakistan against India, but to actually pitch women against men and mothers against fathers, because look at the discrepancy that there is as far as the leaves for fathers is concerned and as far as the leaves for mother is concerned. And then there's also the concept of daycare facilities. So that जो आपका है पाकिस्तान के अंदर आपके daycare की जो law है, that's your shops and establishment ordinance. And that says that you have to basically provide for daycare facility and daycare room if you have 25 women working in your organization or in your establishment. I have a problem with that because why should the provision of daycare facilities and maternity benefits be sort of associated with women? Because when you do that, you're tacitly giving employers the grounds for discriminating against hiring women. You see, because you need to disassociate the provision of these facilities with the number of women you have in the workforce, because that's what sort of plays in the minds, and then they say, "Acha, 25 se zyada pe we'll have to offer this, we'll have to take care of this baggage that comes along with the female employee or a female worker. So let's just not hire the 25th woman or more." So I think this is something that if all citizens are equal before the law in the Constitution, then our laws should be developed keeping that concept of equality in mind, right? So that's the thing. So only when we increase the paternity leave for fathers, we will illustrate that we reject these, archaic gender roles. And only when employers stop associating maternity leave or daycares with women, we will have, we can probably have a day where the employers will actually start looking at women as professionals and not through the lens of their gender or the baggage that comes with it. So yeah, so that's my appeal, that we need to correct the imbalance that is there as far as these laws are concerned. But wohi baat hai, if equality is not in the minds of the people who are making the decisions and the policies and the rules and regulations, it's unlikely that it's going to be reflected in the laws and decisions and policies they make. So they can say that all citizens are equal, but when they're making those laws, the patriarchal mindset sort of just creeps in. So now a little bit on the safety as far as workplace is concerned. We have the harassment we have the harassment law, which is the protection for harassment of women at workplace. But you see, this is not the only sort of safety that women need, and I'm sure as far as mobility and safe access to an efficient transportation is concerned, Kate is going to help us understand that in more detail. But as far as harassment at workplace law is concerned, if you just talk about that, the problem with that legislation is that it defines harassment in a very narrow context of sexual overtures. And from the Women in Law dialogue series that we had, we came to the conclusion that a lot of harassment that female lawyers faced in their profession was not of the sexual nature. And so there is no lesser degree of harassment that's catered into the law. And it does not consider one-off altercations between a man and a woman, or a man calling a woman jahil or battamiz as constituting to or amounting to harassment, even though that sort of an incident can actually lead to future such incidents. And another omission from that act is that ex-employees cannot bring a claim under the provision, and there's no limitation period as such that allows the ex-employee to actually file proceedings or bring a claim under this provision. And I think that's a very important omission, and we need to look into it when we talk about policy, because a lot of women, if they're still in employment, if they're still working at the workplace, they can bring proceedings. But if they lose their job and if they become ex-employees, then they lose their right to bring proceedings under the law as well. So this is a loophole that needs to be catered to. And finally, before I close, I'd like to briefly highlight the issue of women finding it hard to access credit and financial institutions. And in the way the banking practices are structured, there's a lot of discrimination, and women are not able to access credit in the same way as men do in our society. Because when they go to apply these loans, they still need 2 male guarantors to provide guarantee for the loan that they're seeking, and one of that guarantor has to be unrelated to that woman. And in the society as segregated as ours, it's very difficult for the woman to find somebody like that, and even if they do, it comes at a cost. So the banking practices are unequal, and also an added factor is that they need the permission of the husband to sign those documents on which she's applying for loan. Of course, microfinance schemes exist, but microfinance, the quantum of the loan that they can get through that is sometimes not adequate. So the general normal banking channels, they are a bit discriminatory as far as women are concerned. And before I close and open the panel to the other speakers, I would like to stress that our objective shouldn't really be just to achieve equality, but rather our focus when we are trying to develop the policies and the laws and frameworks should be to create an enabling environment for women to be able to practically claim their space in the workforce without having to make the difficult choices as to of having to take care of their families. And if such an enabling environment is ensured, there's no way that women will not just participate in the workforce, but they will also excel at it. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you very much. So clearly, some of the laws need updating. That will, how we update them is also going to be a question. But so Kate, you work on a lot on women's mobility as well as one of the barriers. Over to you.
Yeah. Great, thank you all very much. This was very interesting, your first comments, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the whole discussion. I'm sharing a few thoughts from the project that we have ongoing here at SERP, focused on women's mobility and workforce participation. Next slide. So, if you survey women in Pakistan, and including, this is the subset for urban Punjab, I think this slide has been skipped here. Yeah, if you survey women, many of them are not working and say they don't want to, but many of them also say they would like to work if they could find a suitable job. So this is data from the Pakistan DHS. About 1 in 5 women in that urban Punjab sample was working, but then another 1 in 4 say if I could find something, if I could find a job that would work for me, I would take it up. So we would more than double, if all of those women took up employment, we would more than double the female labor force participation rate. I think it's worth pointing out at the beginning, this has come up before in discussions about this project, that I think nobody, and I would imagine everybody on the panel would agree with me, nobody's here to kind of say we need to be pushing women into the workforce, but we should be thinking about what kinds of things would enable women who would like to take up employment opportunities to do so. Next slide. One of the, there are many, obviously many constraints on this, but working outside the home is specifically particularly difficult for women in this context. Next slide. Many people would argue that we ought to be focusing on increasing opportunities inside the home to cater to that constraint. And I am not against that. I think that would be a very worthwhile thing to do. But it's worth pointing out that the payoffs to that are very little. So if we look at how much women earn by their education level, this is from Pakistan Labor Force survey data. Women who are educated earn more, but only if they're working outside the home. When you look at women who are working inside the home, which is the darker pink bar here, there's basically no returns to education. And so I think it's not impossible that we could find opportunities for home-based work and expand home-based work in a way that's conducive for a lot of people, but clearly this is not kind of the one big picture solution. Next slide. So the premise of our project is that getting to work is one of the major challenges facing women, and in different ways in different contexts, but this is focusing on the urban context. Yeah. So, you know, anecdotally and qualitatively, when we've talked to women in the workforce, it's very much a standard feature of their working lives that they're getting harassed on the way to work, that they don't feel safe on the way to work. You know, women will just frankly say, you know, men follow me, men kind of harass me, they expose themselves to me as I'm trying to get to work. It's just the way it is. Next slide. And when we ask here women, when we've asked women in a survey of about 1,000 women a couple of years back, how they feel, how safe they think the transport options they have are, what we find is that generally they feel very unsafe in many of the transport options. So it does vary a lot option by option. So for example, the large buses that you see, this was before the metro bus, or this was referring not to the metro bus, but to the other kind of large public buses, the 75-seaters. Those are generally considered safer, but you still see, you know, full quarter or so of women respondents who say it's definitely not safe in my area to ride the bus at night. And it's not shown in this graph, but actually walking on the street is, according to what people report, what women report in these surveys, the worst part, the most unsafe, the part of their commute where they feel most unsafe. Next slide. So transport options to work, our hypothesis is, are potentially really affecting women's choices of jobs. It could be whether to work. It could be if you're working, what job opportunity you're able to take up. So this is a woman in the garment factory who said, look, the previous job didn't have a transport service, this one did, so that was basically my deciding factor. That's the reason that I went for this factory and not another one. Next slide. And on the employer side, if we look at the labor demand side, we find, sorry, can you go back?
You're on the 8,000 slide.
Sorry?
This is the next slide.
Yes, thank you, sorry. So when we've asked women in our baseline survey, the large baseline survey for this main project, whether they are interested in taking up a job, that we have, I haven't shown this here, but we have many women who are just not interested in working to begin with, but a lot of women who appear in our sample is very similar to the urban Punjab data I showed before, who say, yes, I'm interested in a job, and we are in fact in this project signing them up for an employment facilitation service. So when they say, yes, we're willing to work, then we ask them, if there's transport available, does that change your interest in that job? And they say, and the vast majority of those who are seriously interested in working say it definitely makes a difference for them. Here this is those who think that they're probably willing to work. Again, about 40% of them say it definitely makes it more likely likely, and then the vast majority say they think at least somewhat, it will increase their likelihood, at least to some extent. So based on at least self-reported data, women are telling us that transport is a factor for them in deciding either whether to work or where to work. Next slide. So yes, on the labor demand side, for employers, this clearly makes an impact as well. So when we've talked to employers, they're saying, look, those who really depend on female employees, like in specific industries that require them, like beauty parlors, they're saying, look, we have to offer transport, otherwise we just don't attract and retain the employees that we need. Next slide. And in some firms that don't require female employees but would be seeking to have a diverse workforce, or at least open to hiring women, they're saying that that when they have had a pick and drop service, it's been a factor. That when they, the HR person here told us that, look, when we started piloting the transport with you, that when we were interviewing people, this becomes like an important part of the package that we're offering, that it is very interesting to them. So anecdotally, this seems to be important in terms of affecting female labor force participation. Again, I want to emphasize that we're not saying it's the only factor, even necessarily the biggest one, but it seems like an important one. Next slide. So there's several government initiatives that have been taken in the recent years to try to address some of these issues. As some of you may know, there is a women's only bus running on a couple of routes in Lahore, the Pink Bus. In some of the buses, so one issue is kind of that many of the large HOV buses do have a separate space for women, which is something that generally women say they prefer, but not all of them have a divider, and then they depend, whether they have enough space really varies a lot. And in the small wagons, like the 25 passenger wagons, which are also part of the government public transport system, there's essentially no separate space, and that people are just all kind of crammed in together. In the case of the mass transit system that's being built, and so far the first line on it, the Metro bus, there is a protected separate space, and anecdotally, it's something that people say a lot, that the fact that this has a proper stop where it's lit, where I stand and I don't feel that I'm going to either be run over or possibly grabbed by somebody as he walks by, that kind of infrastructure can make a difference to whether it feels like a safe space or not. Next slide. So those were all about public transport. There's a separate kind of set of issues here around just normalizing the idea of women being in the public space, which is a tough one to tackle. The government and partners have been doing this Women on Wheels initiative, trying to get women out using motorbikes or scooters. Generally, as you all know, riding independently on a motorbike is something that's super taboo here. I think this is very exciting. I think it's going to, it has a potential to change things for certain people, but not for everybody. I think many people would not consider doing this for multiple reasons, and so it should be thought of as part of a larger set of approaches to this issue. Next slide. The current policies have a number of limitations. So I mentioned earlier that there are women's only buses on select routes in Lahore, but many areas don't even have buses with separate women's compartments. So this is, again, from this survey that we conducted across the metropolitan area of Lahore. This is a couple of years ago now. And what we've asked here just is there in your neighborhood, is there a bus that has a separate women's compartment? And what we find is that in the majority, at least some of the buses do have a separate women's compartment, but in a not insignificant sort of set of areas in the Lahore area, there is not, and it's only the minority where all of the buses have a separate women's section, and that's really something that people demand a lot. So it raises a question, and we've discussed this in a lot more detail in a policy brief, which kind of digs into some of these findings a little bit more. It raises a question of should we be investing in having separate vehicles for women, or should we just kind of spread those resources over a much larger set of vehicles to ensure that there's a protected, safe space on every vehicle and increase the geographic coverage. Next slide. And yes, when we ask people in surveys, again, what do you think about these different types of transport options? we were sort of assessing the interest in women's-only spaces, and we find that there's a really strong interest in women's-only spaces. So here we've asked about a women's-only wagon. But even when we ask people about a bus with a separate compartment for women, there's almost, there's very strong interest in that as well. So the difference between how safe people feel they would be on a bus with a separate women's compartment versus a separate women's only bus is actually not that big. So from just a resource allocation point of view, it might make more sense to allocate those resources towards these, especially because it's just very difficult to make the women's only bus, it's just not financially self-sustaining at all, because of just the total passenger load. Yeah, next slide. There are also a number of areas, this now predates the feeder routes to the Metrobus, which have recently been started, so I'm not sure if all of these are still correct, but at least this is after the Metrobus, before those started, we mapped out all the public transport routes in Lahore with the assistance and collaboration of the government, which provided some of these GIS layers. And what we see is that there are quite substantial areas that have no public transport routes, not buses, not wagons. So these may look kind of small on the map, but that's because this is, like a 30, 40 kilometer distance here. These are fairly large areas that don't have coverage, or at least didn't as of the making of this map. So one question is, making the vehicles that are there safe, the other and sort of comfortable and socially acceptable, and another is just ensuring that there's coverage everywhere that there needs to be. Some of these are pretty densely populated areas. This is the GT road here. This is a pretty densely populated area here that has no routes running through it. Next slide. So from the first phase of this project, which has involved a lot of scoping and kind of descriptive data analysis, we have, as I mentioned, a policy brief which highlights some of the recommendations that we're making for the government. One is that continuing expanding high quality public transport is really important for women, and I think that's something that tends to get neglected in the conversation about these sorts of investments. Having fixed and announced schedules, which is something that happens on some of the newer transport modes, but does not happen in the older large bus system, makes a big difference. And we piloted a women's only transport vehicle on a couple of routes in Lahore as a part of the project, and we found that this piece was extremely important for people because women don't want to stand for a long time at the bus stop. Nobody does, but it's especially important if you're stressed about harassment. Having a protected stop space is really important. That's not the case in most places in Lahore. And overall crowding on the mixed vehicles is a big issue as well. So these are things, I think one could argue that the interest of just in general improving the quality of public transport is very much in line with the interest of making it more accessible and more safe for women. Next slide. The second is that we really ought to be doing a much more comprehensive job, or any kind of an effort, to be honest, in terms of training and monitoring the staff of public transport vehicles in terms of harassment. So we did this in our pilot service, and we had some people who were new to the transport sector, but some who had worked in public transport vehicles before, and they said, this is the first time anybody has ever actually sat down with us and talked about this issue. So, which is particularly shocking if you think about the fact that women do report that the staff of the transport are sometimes harassing them, but also that the staff are particularly in a good position if they know that it's expected of them to intervene when something happens. A lot of the time they just don't know what they're supposed to do. So they may be, perfectly reasonable people who are not going to commit any crime against a woman passenger, but when something happens, they kind of think like, I need to keep the bus moving. I'm supposed to just sort of make sure that we keep on selling tickets and keep going. They just don't have any guidance about this. So in our pilot, we tested this, and it was a very encouraging experience. It's something that ought to be done across the board. Next slide. And then, as I kind of hinted a little bit, we ought to be thinking a bit more systematically about improving the value for money in investments that are targeted towards this. So does it really make sense to have a women's only bus that is running at less than half capacity, or should we take that same money and spend it on better infrastructure, less crowding, more frequent and reliable services across the system to make sure that women are comfortable in a separate compartment, since that is what we hear them overwhelmingly kind of saying, that they do want that separation. And even if we keep a separate women's only transport, it ought to be run in a different way. I feel pretty confident saying that large vehicles don't make sense on this kind of a route because they don't fill up. It's spending more money than we need to be even to cover the same routes at the same time frames. And the pink bus currently doesn't cover the evening. It runs until the mid-afternoon. And so when we surveyed women on the pink bus, they're telling us that, look, I go to work on it, but then what am I supposed to do to get home? It's just not oriented towards working women at all. Yeah, okay, next slide. But I think one piece that's been, there's obviously transport has been something that's been super controversial and very much on the public agenda here in the past years. One thing that really has not received the kind of attention that it should is just the impact that public safety on the sidewalk has on the safety of the commute. And that, again, applies to men and women, but it differentially affects women. So so you can have a very nice vehicle that gets you somewhere fast and gets you somewhere safely, but when you get off of it, if you walk to the rest of the way to your destination, whether that's on the way to work or especially in the evening coming home, if that's dark, if there's no sidewalk, then you're not going to feel safe. And so this sort of general pedestrian friendliness, as well as particularly safety in the form of things like street lighting, really need more attention. And this is another kind of area that would sort of complement this, is to think a bit more systematically about training police and engaging the female police officers in ensuring sort of safety and in responding to reported harassment. Next slide. We're doing a second piece of the study, that's the kind of bigger piece of the study, in which we are testing how much transport affects male and female workers and employers, and specifically testing in a much more, in a rigorous way, how important is a women's only space. Next slide. So we're doing a randomized control trial, which in the sort of quantitative approach is often called sort of a gold standard for impact evaluation. We've done baseline surveys of women and employers across Lahore. Next slide. And we're going to be designating routes for women only and mixed gender pick and drop services, as well as control routes. So ultimately we'll be able to compare what happens in terms of employment after women have a better option, how much these sort of transport services affect women and men, how different are they, and whether women are affected differentially when there's a women's only option. Next slide. So we'll be doing a follow-up survey to observe what happens to them, and then cost-benefit analysis to assess the impact and think a little bit about whether it's worth the money. The idea here is to test and evaluate one approach, and if it's successful, it both could be considered for a scale-up, but also informs the general policy discussion that I've been talking about earlier, in the sense that if we quantify and say how important is this for workers, how important is it for employers, we can say something about how much money ought the public to be spending on this. I think that's it. Is there one more slide here? Yes, okay, so we have a large team, some of whom are newer, joined since I made these slides, and I haven't added their names here, but they're all fantastic. And if you're interested in joining it, we're always looking for more people on this project. And we've had wonderful support from many funders and partners and government interlocutors as well. Thanks very much.
Associate at the Strategic Reforms Unit, Chief Minister's Office. So this is a small think tank that's a part of the Chief Minister's Office. If you go on to the next slide, please. We work as a policy reform and implementation cell that is embedded in the Chief Minister's Office. So our direct reporting is to the political leadership, and we're working with multiple partners, which includes the bureaucracy, of course, which includes I think everyone can hear me without the microphone, right? So, which includes the bureaucracy, politicians, legislatures, media personnel, and even private sector to some extent. So it's actually a very interesting position for us to be able to introduce and implement these reforms, because we like to take everyone on board while doing so. So, The project that I'd like to talk about today is a very specific intervention that the Punjab government has introduced, and it's called Women on Wheels. We started off in 2015 through the provision of free motorcycle trainings for women in Lahore. And the first batch was, I think, around 60 women who signed up for the project. And even then, we were a bit skeptical about the impact that this project could have, as was already pointed out by the other panelists as well, that the acceptability of women accessing the public space through a motorbike is still not there. So over the past 2 years, we've expanded the initiative to other districts, including Rawalpindi, Multan, Faisalabad and Sargodha, and we've been able to train more than, I think, 3,500 women how to ride motorbikes. And a lot of these women are actually using motorbikes, especially in Faisalabad, even in some of the rural parts of Sargodha. And to further take this campaign another notch, we decided to introduce a subsidized motorbike scheme for women. And the first batch of that scheme was actually launched a month back, and we received around 700 to 800 applications of women who wanted to apply for the scheme. So these are women who had motorbike licenses, qualified for the scheme, and also had to meet the low income bracket that the subsidy was attempting to target. So basically, the reason why we've chosen such a specific intervention, which is to train women and then to give them subsidized motorbikes, is again because of the major issue of social acceptance, that women are still women form 49% of the population, and they still don't have access to one of the most common forms of self-reliant transportation in this country, which is the motorbike. As pointed out earlier by Kate as well, that the transportation system is something that the government is working on, but it's still not that dense. It still needs a lot of work. There are a lot of routes that are not available, even with the Pink Bus initiative. It's very limited. So this is something that that allows women that access which they have been barred from. And coming from the government, this also gives a sort of a messaging to the public that the government wants to introduce such initiatives to empower women. Next slide, please. So basically, Women on Wheels mainly promotes gender equality, the reclamation of public spaces for women, and provides freedom of mobility to 49% of the population. Okay, so basically, this is also one of the major initiatives that we at the government have introduced, along with other parallel initiatives to create inclusive spaces for women. And one of that was a law that was drafted by our unit, and we also ensured that it was passed by the Assembly as well, which is called the Punjab Protection of Women Against Violence Act. So that act is has its own implementation mechanism in the form of a Violence Against Women Center. And we have our first center that's set up in Multan, which provides all sort of police, prosecution, psychosocial, all sort of medical services to women. And this is a parallel initiative that we're trying to take up at the government to ensure that violence against women is addressed and eliminated. So now that we have the first center in Multan, we'll be spreading this to the rest of the 36 districts through this other intervention that we've introduced, which is the infrastructure of a Punjab Women Protection Authority, which is going to be an authority that is going to focus on purely the implementation and monitoring of these centers. Similarly, we have another initiative. We've actually introduced chapters in pertaining to gender sensitization of curriculum in grades 9 to 12 textbooks for the social studies curriculum for Punjab textbook board. So that is also something that we're trying to target in order to reform the curriculum to an extent and include this very crucial aspect of women's empowerment, of raising the question on gender-based violence, and of educating young minds on what is patriarchy, what is toxic masculinity, what are the laws that are there in the Constitution. So these are things that are there in the chapters that we've actually introduced. Next slide, please. So these are some of the pictures from the rallies that we've conducted for Women on Wheels. We've conducted rallies in Sargodha, in Faisalabad, and in Lahore. And maybe within, I guess, a month or so, we're actually planning a mega rally where we're going to be allowing the women who've taken up the motorbikes, who've actually been eligible for the customized motorbikes, to come on the roads and reclaim their public space and create a sort of strong statement for the rest of the public. Next slide, please. So this is sort of like a bifurcated data of where we've been able to train and where we've been able to target most of the women. So in Lahore and Faisalabad, we can see that this is the most dominant category. And even in Sargodha, a lot of the trainees that are taking up the trainings are people who belong to rural backgrounds. Next slide, please. So this is about the second phase of the campaign, where we are introducing subsidized motorbikes with a collaboration of the transport department. This is something similar to what the bike looks like. It's a Honda Dream CD70 motorbike and not a scooty. And it's pink in color, purely for logistical and technical reasons. And this was actually the first advertisement we released for this campaign. And as I mentioned, that we've received an overwhelming response from Lahore and Faisalabad. Again, we've received around, I think, 700 to 800 applications total for the first phase. So because we can give out around 3,000 bikes as per the subsidy, we're going to be bifurcating this, and the next phase of the campaign will probably be launched within 2 to 3 months. Next slide, please. So this is again something that we are all aware of, and we all, as women, those who are women in this room, we all face, and this is something that the rest of the panelists also highlighted, that women's mobility is something that you have been barred from since childhood, that has these barriers in place. And this is where our, the reason why we introduced this initiative is because we felt that mobility is one of the major reasons why women are not able to reach their complete potential, are not able to reach that level of empowerment, and that's why we want to target this particular initiative. So the thing with our campaign is that it's not actually just about giving motorbike trainings or giving subsidized motorbikes. It's not the commodity, it's not the skill. It's actually the social change that we're trying to prompt with this campaign. Because on a parallel basis, there are other campaigns that are being launched. There's a Girls on Bike campaign, and there are a lot of girls who have actually participated in that. Similarly, there are other initiatives of the government where they are giving bicycles to students, and that has to girl students, and that has actually shown an increase in their enrollment levels for secondary school students and for high school students. So this is one of the reasons why we want to target this campaign. We want to actually invite all of you to help us support this campaign, to be a part of the social change, because it's not again about the training or the motorbike. It's about that mindset where there isn't that acceptability that women can have access to a self-reliant form of transportation, which men can, and that is the motorbike. Next slide, please. So we have these messages from some of our trainees, and I feel that the major impact of this campaign is not captured in terms of numbers, or is not quantifiable in that sense, but in terms of the stories that these women have to share with us, that how just the fact that they've learned how to ride a motorbike or have a motorbike has actually transformed their lives in the major sense. So this is one of the messages that our trainee Sadaf had to share. Next slide, please. And similarly, these are some of our trainees from Faisalabad and Sargodha. And I think the most interesting comment came from the middle one. She has to say that many people will talk nonsense and say things like, how can you sit like a boy on a bike? There have been negative comments, but how long will they keep saying things? Once, twice, then they'll stop. They have to stop because we will make them. So this actually captures those 3,600 women that we've trained and that are a part of this campaign, and also people who've been supporting this initiative, not just at the end of the government, civil society, and politicians as well, but this is exactly what it's trying to capture. that, you know, women are going to be reclaiming their public space on their own terms, they will be commuting on their own terms, and at the same time they will be able to even for logistical reasons such as shortening the commute. So a lot of the times the reason why these women want to actually take up trainings and take up a motorbike is because they can't afford a car. The bus route is either non-existent or is too long, or they have to rely on a male member of the family to pick and drop them. And these are some very severe hurdles to their empowerment and to the day-to-day routine that they have. So that's basically all for our campaign, and I'm really grateful to be here and actually share this campaign with you, and I hope that you can also help us support it.
You and then ask the panelists to respond. Please do introduce yourself when you ask the question. If you can keep the comment and question brief, that will be great. It will be more people joining in the conversation.
My name is Tahira Habib and I represent her Human Rights Commission of Pakistan. I just had a brief comment as our first panelist threw light on the legislation and laws available. I would like to mention one thing, that if laws are made available to people, like women, if at workplace is a certain number of women working only, then there will be childcare facilities and all that. If it makes people feel better, I would mention here that I have worked 20 years in US consulate, and when we demanded their childcare facility, they said that even today in the US, I left in 2015, until 2015 there was no such provision in American institutions. Even in the State Department, there was no child care facility available. But if we are now making laws to make women take part in public life in bigger numbers and make a bigger contribution, I would make one observation, that if we make laws that you should give certain facilities to women, at the same time that should also be made compulsory, that should not be a hindrance in employing women. I will give one example, that in Al Habib Bank, they do not hire women. They have hundreds of branches. They do not hire women, and that's the only reason. They don't want to give maternity leave and child care facilities or such things. So if that should be made compulsory, that even if you have one woman and if you don't have any woman, you should make child care facilities available and such things. Only in that case women will be encouraged. They will take part in public life.
Hello, my name is Samia. I have two questions. The first one from Kate. So for the women in your sample who said they were not willing to work, did you collect any data or do you have any idea through your interviews the reasons for their unwillingness? My sense is that a major constraint is that a majority of women have to bear the burden of household chores. So perhaps one major reason for their unwillingness would be that they don't want to take on this additional burden of going to work. Is that something that came up? And my second question is there any law or legal precedent that speaks to employers either finding out during the recruitment process or making it part of the recruitment decision whether a potential female employee is pregnant or interested in childbearing in the near future?
Hi, I'm Mariam from Lahore School of Economics, and my question is from the last presenter. I would like to know that how do you ensure that the motorbike that you're actually providing is being used by the female? How do you ensure that it is just not being taken and then male members of the family is not using that? And secondly,
that's why they made it pink.
You can easily change the color. Secondly, I would like to ask that are you collecting any information on the females which are actually applying for that motorbike? Maybe the ones who are working are the ones who might be using that as well. The ones who might not be working might not be using, and some other family members may be using that. Thank you.
My name is Amara Farooq Malik. Thank you so much for inviting me. I think it's very interesting to see such wonderful initiatives. I just want to make two comments. One to Kate. Since 2008, I have been working from home. Now, I was listening to your presentation. It was very interesting to note that you said that women particularly, who don't step out of the home, have not been able to make any difference. My background is that I run the CEPLA Enterprises and I run the CEPLA Foundation. And just in this particular March, we were able to reach across to 84,000 people through social media to hold 3 awards for women. One of our winners is sitting over there, Nida. And we were able to gather so many people together through technology. And that is an area you simply cannot take out of your research. Because if you look at the government's e-Rozgar program, it essentially is reaching across to women who can do freelancing jobs from home, they can do coding from home, going into artificial intelligence. And I think a lot of work is being done in that area which needs to also be covered. Secondly, what was the second point? Yes, I'm also part of the Women in Leadership program of the Punjab government. If you wrote down Punjab Commission on the Status of Women there. And the problem there is I think one of the panel participants mentioned about Habib Bank or university not hiring women, Al Habib Bank. Now this initiative called the Women in Leadership Program essentially scouts for females who can be placed on government boards. Now I was a part of this program for over a year. Can you believe how many women were actually placed on government boards through this program? I think Fatma might be knowing about it, perhaps not. Now 33% by law is the requirement for all government boards to have women placed in their board meetings. Now that percentage cannot be met, not because the women are not available, not because women are not educated, but because the remaining, how many is 100 takeaways, 33 is 70, 67. 67% of the men are unwilling to share that space with the women as leaders. So I don't think that the problem is a lack of laws or even the implementation of the laws. It's more to do with the understanding of our social constraints. Thank you.
I am Azuba from Punjab Economic Research Institute. I am Azuba from Punjab Economic Research Institute, and my question is from Ms. Fatima. Actually, we have conducted survey on situational analysis of female factory workers in the manufacturing sector of Lahore, and when we were asked about the Women on Wheels project, and they didn't know about this project, but when we asked about the concern whether they want to take this opportunity, or then they were very much concerned about this project, but they didn't know about the procedure from where my question is what Punjab government is doing to create awareness at remote areas or among the factory workers who can't afford to take this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go in reverse order. So I did not say that women who work in the home cannot make a difference. What I'm saying is that just looking at work within the home that does not require mobility outside the home is not going to deliver returns to education and good employment opportunities to a large number of people. I think the initiatives that you're mentioning are very exciting. I would imagine I haven't looked at the data on this in much detail, but I would imagine if you break it down, what you'll see is that they're going to be most relevant and most effective for people who have a lot of education. So very highly skilled consultants or researchers such as yourself, who would be able to offer something to an employer that can be done remotely. And then you'll also see in-home work that's at the very lowest levels of education, which might be stitching, that kind of work. Those things are going to be very important for many people, but if we look at it percentage-wise, that's not going to hit the mark for the bulk of the population who might be interested in working. So, I'd be very keen on learning more about them in general. I also think this Women in Leadership program is a very interesting one, and I'm keen to learn more about it. Okay, so then Samia, why are the women not willing to work, and is it because they're doing all the housework? So if you look at the Pakistan Time Use survey, in which there's about, I think, 7,000 or 8,000 households. Members of those households have been asked to complete a diary of what they did in the last 24 hours, hour by hour, or half hour by half hour. And you sum up what people are doing with their time. What you find is that the women who work, so women do all the housework. The women who work still do all the housework. The men who don't work don't do any housework. Yes, I think it's definitely a big issue, and it's partially a norms and partially kind of a negotiation issue. I think it's definitely one of the factors. It's not the only factor. I think what you see, and this is true in many contexts, it's certainly true in a lot of the subcontinent, that for the woman to choose not to work is also something that you see more as people move into the middle classes and have the luxury to afford not to. So you see this kind of relationship. It's not linear. For the poorest, they have to work, no matter how unpleasant the job is. For the most educated, at least, which is overlapping a lot with the richest, they're choosing to work because they're getting to do really interesting stuff like what we get to do with our day. There's white-collar jobs in which there's good compensation, the work is interesting and rewarding, it's often less public exposure, if you're sitting and working in a comfortable office as opposed to sort of, let's say, working on the street. And so what you find is that in between, especially in urban environments, women are pulling out of the workforce. And I think part of that is definitely an empowered choice. Like, it's not that all of them are wanting to work and not being able to because their families aren't letting them. Women are also making this choice deliberately because they would rather have the possibility of staying home, being at home looking after small kids and not having to juggle all of it at the same time. But I think we should be definitely trying to empower women to make whichever choice they want. And then you talked about the bank choosing not to hire any women. This is definitely an issue, but one thing that's sort of interesting, I was surprised by, and what we're doing is that we've set up a job matching service for men and women as a part of our project, and so we approach employers and ask them to list positions with us. And in our pilot, 25% of the firms that we approached immediately listed a job. Most of those had never listed the jobs publicly anywhere before. They mainly recruited through word of mouth, which is something that in other work has been shown to disadvantage women because they don't have the same kinds of work social networks. But they're listing jobs, and of those, even the firms that had no women currently, many of them listed jobs for women or jobs that were open to women. So I think there's clearly a lot of issues on the demand side, like on the employer side, but I think it's also, I was surprised by how much willingness and interest there is, and so we'll see whether they put their money where their mouth is in the next phase of this study.
If I may ask, before you move to others, are we seeing transport as a lead variable that can actually impact a lot of other variables, whether they be cultural or related to economics?
Could you elaborate on that a little more?
Are we saying that allowing mobility can be a way of changing the equilibrium in a number of other spheres as well, as far as women's work is concerned?
I mean, that's what we would like to see in this. Ultimately, I mean, I think this is about more than just getting from point A to point B. So our colleague who was working on this project with us in the past and since had worked with LSE in London, Fizza Sajjad, she was actually interviewed last weekend in the news, newspaper. And the interviewer asked her that, why is women's mobility important? And she said, well, why is men's mobility important? It's when you put it that way, it sort of seems a little absurd, because to be able to move freely is what allows us to do everything else that we do in life. In the public sphere, it allows us, like the example that you showed of the woman who was able to take her father-in-law to the doctor. So on a day-to-day basis, it's enabling all of those things, but ultimately what we would like to see is that by kind of providing a mechanism for them to come out into the public space, that becomes more socially acceptable as well. So that's something we plan to measure, but we don't have results on it yet, so I don't want to argue too much based on our priors.
How do you ensure that this won't be misused? The fact that, there are motorbikes, you can change the paint, and so the thing is that we're the ones who are actually running the trainings as well, and we're doing it in collaboration with the police, the Punjab police. And the application process for the motorbike is actually, it has a few steps involved. So the first step is that you have to submit a few documents to the bank, and the bank has all your data. So the bank has your CNIC, domicile, learner's license, all the details. And following that, this data is then shared with district verification committees. And these district verification committees are headed by deputy commissioners of the districts. Then this data is also shared with us at the Chief Minister's office, and we are verifying it with the police. And the police already has the data of the learners' licenses. They already have the data of the trainings that they are conducting, because we're doing the trainings in collaboration with them. So essentially, when these girls are applying, we actually have those lists where we know that a lot of them are women who we've trained. And a lot of them would not actually want to go through the hassle of going through these few steps in order to get the bike unless they really need it. So, and this is also very interesting that initially we didn't want the pink color to be painted on the bike, because that kind of reinstates that gender stereotype. We wanted it to be orange or something else, if a color at all. And and actually, a lot of the bureaucrats, they raise this point that, there are a lot of men who, especially those who are coming from the patriarchal notions, who would be embarrassed to sit on a pink bike. So I think you should go ahead with this color. So so we do have these checks in place, and we're hoping that, we will be following up with the campaign once the bikes are given out.
There's one on everything.
On awareness, exactly. So I mean, we are trying to create awareness about this issue. We have actually also launched a few street theatre campaigns where we had a play specifically on the Women on Wheels campaign. Then we had a play on gender-based violence and other forms of violence. So, I mean, we are trying to work on that, but you're right that awareness is a challenge that we also face, that because awareness is something that you can't ever have enough of, especially because, it's very difficult to reach out to a lot of women, especially the women that we want to target, who are not mobile enough, and therefore accessing them is also, you can say, a concern. But we are parallelly launching videos and other forms of awareness. So we're trying our best to create as much awareness as we can.
I mean, given this Chief Minister has real penchant for technology, maybe you can have fingertip recognition on the handlebars, so that it only works with the person in question. हमारे computers में तो है.
So before I answer Samya's question, I also have one question for Kate, and that is that I think with the advent of Uber and Careem and all those kind of applications that sort of overlap with the transportation sector as well, I think I would like to ask if those kind of services are being calculated in your data, and the impact that they are having in the society as far as female mobility is concerned, because I know a lot of women are using that as well. So I'd like to know what, whether that is being, catered to for in your research as well? Not.
If I can also add something, so we were also reaching out to Kareem because they've also started women motorbike cyclists. So around, I think they shared the data with us, around 60 to 70% of users of Kareem are female actually. So they're
My
actually
mother
getting
uses
on-
it, so I know that I no longer have to take her here and there. So I think that's a very important factor that probably needs to be get to. And Samya, I'm sorry, you will have to ask your question again because I missed it when you asked it the first time.
Yeah, I don't think there is any, but I was just wondering if you're aware of any law, it could be in other countries as well, or legal precedent.
Employers ask whether
Acha.
a woman is
Pregnant or
planning to have a family. in the
yeah,
future.
you know, when they ask you what's your plan for the next 5 years or whether you're married or not, those kinds of questions in job interviews or
Right.
finding out through your
To
network.
my knowledge, I don't think
Yeah,
there is
I'm
a law.
so
sure, yeah.
as inappropriate as it is, obviously, you know, there's no law that, like I said, there's no standalone law that prohibits discrimination. What we do have at best is Article 18 and Article 26 of the Constitution. Article 18 says that women, basically all citizens subject to certain qualifications, and those are related to health and safety. People are free to join any profession and any trade that they like. Also, Article 26 says that no qualified person is to be discriminated against in matters of employment on basis of gender alone. So technically speaking, you have these two constitutional covers, but you don't have any standalone law that actually prohibits this. But yes, it is extremely inappropriate and something that will only go if we get the women and the baggage associated with them. Like I mentioned, that the childcare and maternity leave shouldn't be associated with women only. And only when we disassociate that, as also I think our friend from HRCP mentioned, only when we disassociate the making of availability of these services will we be able to deal and tackle the issue of questions such as these when employers are considering hiring women. Because until then, they're going to keep, you know, sort of making these calculations to see, acha, you know, if we are going to hire this person, what's the baggage that comes with it. So women just need to be seen as professionals, and that can't happen unless we increase paternity leaves and we make provision of child care gender neutral, so that even fathers have the chance of bringing their children to work if need be. So yeah.
Insurances as part of your, when they're employing you, might request you to undergo certain tests by way of which they will have information on your health related matters, etc. It's not explicit, but implicitly they will have access to that kind of information.
Jurisdictions, even when you're required to go through health tests, the tests are not available to beyond a certain number to the HR department, etc. They're not able to access the full range. So it can be, I mean, worked around in that sense also. Kate, do you want to respond to Uber?
Kareem and- Yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely having an impact. I think they're not so accessible for the working classes for a couple of reasons. One is cost, and the other is the smartphone technology. But that's definitely something that they are working actively on. And even since the past, 6 to 12 months, we've seen them introduce new products that are like new services that are specifically targeted, like the rickshaw and so forth. So I think I definitely think it's making an impact. Yeah.
I think even the access of phone, the smartphone is making a difference. There's a paper that Sahar, I think, recently has, where she shows that a good line and a good connection can make a difference on women mobility quite significantly. That's a colleague from LUMS, and she has a paper, I think, out soon, which shows that a good connection and a good line and a good phone makes a difference on women mobility in urban areas especially. Okay, so if that's Asad.
Hi, my name is Asad Liaquat. I had a question to both Kate and Fatma. So the buses or the women-only sort of spaces in buses are an example of a type of mobility that men like, that men prefer, whereas the bikes are an example of a type of mobility that men really don't like. So it would be nice to see, I guess, you are, I'm sure, collecting data on how men's views on sort of appropriateness of women going out in public spaces, or sort of different kinds of gender roles change as women get more exposed to public spaces as a consequence of this thing that they like. But it would also be nice if in the Women on Wheels program we could collect data on this is a type of thing that men don't like women to do, and now women start doing them because you're giving them these bikes. Now, is it the case that their views change, that they think actually bikes are not that bad and it's fine if women are riding on bikes like boys? Or is it the case that they become more entrenched in their views, right? So if social change is coming through a mechanism that men prefer versus a mechanism that men don't prefer, do their views sort of ease up in both cases, or do they harden? So I think that would be interesting to see. If you have anything to say to that, that would be.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is definitely something we are going to be looking at. But we, as you say, so actually, before we started the project, I think we didn't have really strong priors about whether men would like what we're doing or not, because it could be that if it's changing things on the extensive margin, like if the women are going out where they wouldn't have otherwise, then you could imagine very strong opposition. But if it's switching from something else to this, then they would be presumably in favor of it. But at least in our context, this is a Lahore metro area focused study. When we've done both qualitative and quantitative work on this, we've seen very, as you say, the men really like it. So the two different treatment arms that we have in this study, where we're looking at women's only versus mixed gender transport, that's where we're going to be able to isolate this better in the full-blown study. So we do plan to look at end line whether there's any impact on perceptions among the men, but that's something we haven't done as yet.
So I do feel we don't have data on the exact, I would say, like a quantifiable impact that the campaign has had on men who are associated with it in some sense. But a lot of the girls who come to the trainings, they're actually dropped to the trainings by their fathers or brothers, and they have seen a sort of a mindset change that's taking place. A lot of the women are, they come from similar neighborhoods. So one of our trainees, she actually encouraged other girls in her neighborhood to come and join the training. And a lot of the times the families actually come and they see that, you know, they want to give that sort of empowerment to their daughters or sisters, etc., but they're a bit unsure. And then the question of harassment and safety is obviously a very crucial concern. So they often come to the trainings, and then they're briefed on, you know, how they will be taken through all the traffic rules, will be empowered and all of that. And I feel that also in this campaign, we actually, because it's been around 2 years, but we're still it's a very early stage of the campaign. So we didn't actually want to give a lot of importance to the perceptions of men regarding the campaign. For us, the most, in terms of the data that we have captured, pertains to the perceptions of the women who are taking up this mobility on their own terms. So it actually, for now, for this stage, we actually are not focusing on that, because we don't want that to be a question coming from the government. If you're encouraging something like that, you know, let's say the government is taking up a survey of the appropriateness or the suitability of women on wheels, especially coming from men, then that kind of gives sort of like a very negative messaging and a counter narrative to what we're trying to do. So that is a challenge that I guess we would have.
Some of the constitutional provisions with respect to anti-discrimination provisions. But have you been doing any study that how things are being implemented? Part one, she pointed out the leadership question. Now this women in leadership, this specific percentage is not only in public companies, it's also for the trade unions. What's the state of affairs? I recently had some interaction, and there was a very negative attitude to have that number of women in the leadership in the trade unions. Second is that even within the government, different services, I'll give you one example. Counter-terrorism department announced in 2014 275 women officials position in Punjab. They did clear the test, but once they were to go in the training, the department refused 200 women. Only 75 were taken. Then 8 or 9 of them recently won a case in Supreme Court and they got reinstated. But the remaining ones, even the court should have given the decision that, okay, 8 or 9 petitioners, but this is the general principle and all be taken. Recently, I was sitting with a woman SSP in Pindi. I'm a member of National Commission on Status of Women. So she said to me, look at our department, that Police Academy and the National Police Bureau has asked that we don't need that many women officials even at the CSP cadre, right? So how the actual placement is happening? So is there any study on that? And my second question is to, what's your name, Fatima? Fatima, this protection against harassment law, when is it going to be enforced? Any date likely in this tenure of the government?
Yeah, okay, so as far as the studies are concerned, obviously I am not aware of these practical studies, because obviously I don't come from an organization that has the resources to be conducting these studies. So I'm not actually aware of what's happening on ground in these departments, but I can tell you that there are laws to that effect as well. Like there is the Punjab Fair Representation of Women Act as well. I think that was promulgated in 2014, and for a lot of public posts, the law at least says that, you know, there's a certain percentage of women that needs to be there. But practically on ground, yeah. So I am, I'm sorry, not in the position to be aware of those studies, so I won't be able to answer that.
So pertaining to, you didn't ask this question particularly, but I just also want to share that we've also introduced a assistant inspector general gender crimes post. This is something that our unit worked on with the Punjab police, and we actually got her appointed a few months back. So she's going to be an AIG level officer, who's basically going to be coordinating and working to eliminate the gender-based violence cases that are being registered at Punjab police stations across the province. So this is also one of those interventions that we're working on with the police to create more representation of women. As far as the Punjab Protection of Women Against Violence Act 2016 is concerned, so the act itself is implemented in a district once the infrastructure, which is of a protection center or a violence against women center, is set up in that district. So this was implemented last year in Multan in March 2017, where we set up the first violence against women center.
I'm aware of the walk.
Okay.
All the infrastructure there.
Yes.
I'm asking because the law said that it will come into force as government notifies, and
exactly
in different parts it can come. But there has not been its enforcement.
Exactly. So the thing is, this was actually very deliberate. We didn't want to just establish walks all over and then look at the implementation mechanism of it, because the walk actually has a very particular and specific structure which consolidates all of these services, especially police and prosecution, which have never worked with.
Timeline है?
जी, उसकी टाइमलाइन ये है कि अब क्योंकि we have another structure that we've set up, which is called the Punjab Women Protection Authority. This authority will be, functional in where we're hoping, let's say, 2 to 3 months. So this authority is then going to be establishing these centers across the province, because since you also are familiar working with the government, the government departments themselves won't have the capacity of establishing a very complex of a complex structure such as the walk across the province.
So
thank you.
Now the pleasant duty to thank everyone, the panelists, and especially also the people who came to listen to the panelists. Thank you. There's tea outside. Please do join us for that.